Okay, today I want to talk about Apache Webserver and specifically about Apache running in Linux. I've got a fresh install here of CentOS 6.5 Linux. It's my favorite distribution of Linux. We're going to run Apache on the Linux system as opposed to Windows, even though you can do that. But this particular demonstration will be running Apache in Linux. And the goal for this demonstration is to show you how to set up the Apache web server in Linux and then set up some user web spaces so that you can create web pages, websites that will be hosted by Apache, and then go out to another machine on the network. And I do have Windows 7 Ultimate machine here running, and then try to touch those websites using the web browser here on the operating system out on the network. Alright, so let's go back to Linux here. First thing I want to do is I'm logged in as me, and a lot of the things we're going to be needing to do here is it's going to require root privileges, which are the super user privileges. CentOS is one where you can log in as root. A lot of the distros won't let you do that, but this one will, so we're just going to log in as root rather than run super user commands. Alright, so the first thing I need to do is I want to go into the system and log out as me and switch the user over to root. And when it comes up here and lets me log in, I'll change the user over to root. So it's let me click other. And the username here is root, password. Okay, I'm going to log in as root now. So I will have root privileges throughout everything I do here from this point on. I've got a warning message here. You can just ignore it. It's telling us, do you realize you're logged in as root? Because with logged in as root, you can do anything. If you leave yourself logged in as root, if somebody hacks into the system, they can do anything as well. So that's not a good idea to stay in as root. That's why you have a standard user account and a root user account in Linux. Okay, so we're logged in as root now. And one of the first things we'll need to do before we get started with Apache is we need to find out, first of all, if Apache is installed here. A lot of times distributions will have Apache web server pre-installed, and that's to encourage or entice users to use it. CentOS is one that you sometimes find it installed, and sometimes you don't, so we'll have to check it. Before I do that, though, let me go ahead. We're going to be using the terminal, so let me right-click on the terminal here and add that to the desktop so I don't have to keep getting into it that way. So I've got it out here to double-click on it. Next thing I want to do is I've got two workstations set up here. I want to change the preferences on that and bump that up to 3. And I'll tell you why here in a moment. Alright, so we've got 3 workstations. Alright, so the first thing I want to do is double click on the terminal and fire up the terminal. I want to increase that to full screen. I like to have it at full screen so you can see what I'm doing. And I've got 3 workstations here now, so one of them I'm going to go out and actually run the browser here at some point, and may need a third one for some other things, so I can switch back and forth easily. Alright, so the first thing I need to do is determine if Apache is installed, and to do that I'm going to run an RPM -QA and pipe that out to grep HTTPD. The RPM stands for Red Hat Package Manager. It's a command used to install RPM packages. It's also used to query. And so here the -QA is a query all command. The piping to grep is a global search command in Linux. So I'm telling it to run that command and search for, or globally for, an HTTP daemon, which is what HTTPD stands for. And that is, an Apache web server is an HTTP daemon for hypertext transfer protocols, since it is a web server. Alright, so if I hit the enter key here and it returns a version of Apache, we'll know we have it. Since it did not, it means that we do not have Apache installed here, so we're going to have to install it. Now, CentOS Linux uses a manager for installation called Yum. It's a Yellow Dog update manager. There are other distributions of Linux that use other things other than Yum. One of them is APT, you may be familiar with it, or Aptitude, used to install packages and update the system in Ubuntu and also in Debian. But here let's go ahead and issue the Yum command, and I'm going to tell it to install Apache. Let's see if it'll go out and find Apache for us. I could go out and issue an RPM command to install Apache, but the difference between Yum and RPM is RPM will go out and fetch binaries rather for Apache, but if there are any dependencies, it will not fetch those, and so you'll have to be fetching dependencies probably all day long. Yum, however, is the Yellow Dog Update Manager will actually go out and look for the binaries, and if there are dependencies, it'll grab them and bring those with it, so you don't have to do that. Okay, it did not find Apache here, so I'm going to go out and issue another command, yum install httpd instead, and let's see if it finds that. Looks like it did. So it's fetching the binaries here, and it's looking at dependencies as well. It has several. And it's telling me that there are a total of 3.4 megabytes of files that need to be installed. Total download is 1.1, but the total install size is 3.4 megabytes. Wants to know if that's okay, and yes it is. I'm going to install Apache here. And so it's doing the downloading, and now it needs to prompt me for the key. And let's put in a yes there, and so now it's running an RPM check and debugging and doing a transaction test and installing Linux. It checks the packages before it actually installs, which is what I like about CentOS. So it's going to take a few seconds here to install Apache. Once it gets installed, then we're going to look at if it's running or not. Should not be. Alright, so it is completed. Alright, so what I want to do now is I want to issue a command to check to see if Apache is actually running. There are two different commands that I'm aware of that you can use, and one of them is you can go out to the folder called etc httpd, and you can check on the status this way. You can run an I'm sorry, let me go back, ahead of myself. Etc init.d httpd status. Okay, etc is a folder in Linux where your configuration files are. The init.d folder is the initialization daemon folder. It looks at all the daemons. It's where all of the daemons that run in Linux are initialized, and one of those daemons is the httpd daemon, or the http daemon. For web servers, and I'm asking with this command to give me the status or return the status of that daemon. So if I hit enter key, it's telling me that httpd, or Apache here, is stopped. Okay. Another command you can use, which I prefer over this one, is service, can't type today, httpd status. So that's going to do the same thing as the etc initd httpd, and so let's run that one. It's telling me that httpd is stopped. So let's go ahead and start it, and the way to do that is to reissue the service command httpd start, and it's starting the daemon, and it's giving me an OK status. And so if I go back now and look at the status, it should tell me that it's running. Okay, it's currently running, and it also tells me what the PID, or the process identifier, is, which is 2130. That means that that particular process is now currently running in memory. If I wanted to kill Apache because it crashed on me or whatever, I could actually issue a kill command to that PID 2130, and it would kill the process. Alright, so we have Apache up and running. The problem is here, though, that if I reboot this system, Apache is no longer going to be running when it comes back up again. It's only running now because I issued a command to run it. I can do a start or stop or restart here of Apache. But if I want to turn it on every time that CentOS boots up, I have to issue another command called the chkconfig command. and I have to say chk config on. And what that's telling the system now is to make Apache be on every time the system reboots. chk config will initialize Apache in a on mode in the current run level that we have in Linux. Okay, now that we have Apache Web Server up and running, one of the other things we need to do is look at where does Apache put its default web pages. And where that happens here is in a folder called var. So let me click here and type in var www html. All right. So if I it's a directory. I'm sorry. cd var www HTML. Okay, so that changes the directory. Now we're in the HTML directory. If I do an ls-l here for listing, it'll list the total number of files located in that directory. We have no files in there. What we want to do is we want to stick a default web page in that folder because that's where Apache is going to go to retrieve it. And so this is the global area where Apache stores web pages. So I'm going to go ahead and create an index.html page and write some quick code so that we can go out and see it, and then I'll make sure we can access it. All right, so what I'm going to do is issue the touch command index.html while we're in the HTML folder. And that's going to create that index.html file, and I'm going to do a gedit command to actually edit the file, and that's GNU edit. It's a GNU editor, and index.html, and that's going to bring up the editor and open up the page for me. And so I'm going to write some HTML code, and let's see, just have this is the Apache default web page. And close the HTML tag, and then let's go ahead and save that and close this. All right, now I'm going to go out to the workstation and fire up the web browser, and the Apache web server should be running, but if it isn't, we'll find out. And so let me bring that up to full screen. And since we're on the local machine here, I'm going to go ahead and use the localhost command instead of the IP address to find it. So we're just going to issue an http://localhost, and that should bring up that default web page. It does. This is the Apache default web page. So we have proved that Apache Web Server now is up and running, and we are able to hit a default index.html page on the system in Apache. Okay, now that we've done that and we've tested Apache, we could reboot the system, and I could show you that Apache will be running when it reboots, but just take my word for it. Let's go back out to the terminal again. And now what we're going to do here, let me just clear the screen. What we're going to do here is we're going to set up some user accounts with some default web pages in those accounts. And then we're going to go out to another machine on the network, and we're going to hit those websites using the Mozilla Firefox web browser on another machine. One of the things that I need to talk about next is a folder in Linux under the etc folder, which is the configuration folder in Linux, called skel, S-K-E-L. It's a skeleton folder. Anything that you add to the skeleton folder will be global for the system as far as users go. So that particular folder is in the location, let's change directory to etc, S-K-E-L, and we're going to create a, well, first of all, let's look at that and see if there's anything in it. And we're in the skel folder, and so let's do an ls-alh command, and we can see that we've got Mozilla and GNOME. They're two hidden files there, but there's nothing in we're looking at the skel, and there's nothing in there as far as web pages go. We want to create a public _HTML folder as well. So let me go ahead and issue the make directory command in Linux. and let's put that in the etc scale and call it public underscore HTML. Okay, so we're going to create that. Now let's do another ls minus alh command, and you can see that now we have a public underscore HTML folder created. In addition, what we're going to do is we're going to create an index, a default index.html page for every user we're going to set up. And so we're going to have to create that index.html folder in etc scale public underscore HTML. So now let's change the directory to public underscore HTML, and let's create that index page. So let's touch index.html, and now that we've created that, let's make sure it's there, and it is. And now let's go ahead and edit that file and create our beautiful code again here. So let's see, HTML code, tag, start tag, and h1. This is the default user web page. Okay. All right, and let's go ahead and save that. Yeah, let's close it. Okay, so we now have the index.html under there. So that means now that the fact that we've created the public underscore HTML folder under the skel folder, under the etc folder in Linux, anytime we create a user, they'll automatically get a public underscore HTML index.html file attributed or associated with their accounts. So what I'm going to do here next is create 3 users on the system, one called Lincoln, one called Douglas, and one called Bell. And then I'm going to set up 3 web pages for them using that default index.html that we created earlier. And then we're going to go out on the network here to that Windows box and see if we can't access those websites being hosted by Apache Webserver for those 3 users. So to create the 3 users, Lincoln, Douglas, and Bell, I'm going to issue a user add command, and we're going to call the first one Lincoln. So user add Lincoln. Give it a password. Lincoln a password. Here we'll do a password Lincoln. And let's set a new password, capital PA55W0RD. And so retype it. Okay, so we've got the first user set up now. So let's create the second user, user add Douglas. And let's set up a password for Douglas. Let's put in that same password, capital PA55W0RD, and capital PA55W0RD for Douglas as well. All right, then let's set up the third one, which is user add Bell, and password for Bell, PASSWD Bell. And then let's give that user the same password, capital PA55W0RD. Okay, so now we have the 3 user accounts set up. We can actually go out, change directory to the home directory, and take a look and see if we have those set up. So we're going to issue a list command, -R for recursive, and then we're going to look and see if Lincoln, Douglas, and Bell are there. All right, and so we can see what returned here is that we have a Bell user with a public underscore HTML folder and a file called index.html in that folder. Then we have a Douglas user with the same folder and file, and then the Lincoln user with the same folder and file as well. So we accomplished what we wanted to do here. Okay, so in order to change the permissions on those folders so we can access them outside of the system here, I'm going to have to change the permissions using what's called a chmod or change modification command to modify those permissions. And I want to take the this particular ch command here, and I want to add permissions to an executable rather to that. So I want to do an issue 0 plus X, all right, and then on Lincoln, Douglas, and Bell, all right. And so that's going to add the executable permission to those files. So if I go back and do the ls-ld again to get the directory listing for Lincoln, Douglas, and Bell, we should see that change. And we do. Now we see that the executable is added here to the other, which is what the O stands for. So we're changing and modifying the other permissions to adding the executable to the other permissions. The middle one is the group. So this is the user, the group, and the other. Okay. All right. So now we should have that set up so that we can go forward in setting up user spaces for these users. Okay, at this point we need to proceed to look at what's called the Apache configuration file, and that's going to be the file that we'll need to modify. It's very critical to modify that file in order to set up the user spaces. So in Apache, the file for the configuration is located. Let me change the directory to it. So let me click here and change directory to Etsy. It's in the Etsy folder, in an HTTPD folder, and CONF folder. Okay, so I'm going to change to that particular directory. So we're in the CONF folder, and let's do a listing here, simple listing, and you can see that there is an httpd.conf file. That's the one we need to modify in order to set up user spaces in Apache. All right, so before we do that, though, one thing I want to bring to your attention is that's probably not a good idea to modify this file in case we run into problems and we need to recover any errors that we make in that particular configuration file. So we're going to copy that file out and save it. So let me do a cp command to copy httpd.conf, and I want to copy that file to httpd.conf.org, telling it to do an original, copying it out to an original file. All right, so now that we've got that copied out, we need to open this file and take a look at the contents of it. All right, so let me do a edit of that file, a gedit of the file, and let's look at httpd.conf. And that's going to open up the file for us. There are 3 sections in this file for configuration. There's a global section, a server section, and a virtual host section. We want to get down to a section for the purposes of this demonstration to a stanza within this particular file called mod_user_dir.c. So let's do a search find, and we're going to look for mod_user_dir.c here. And let me find it. All right, so it found it, and this is it's about 300 lines. We're on line 360 of this file. And this is a very comprehensive file. It's got a lot of information in here, but it's a very usable and user-friendly file to modify. What we want to do here is we've got a line here that is not commented out. Anytime you see a hashtag or pound tag, it's information that's commented or represents comments. This one is not commented, which means that it's applying or it's working right now. It is the command in the file to actually disable the user directory. We want to enable it. So we want to go and let's go out and enable it by commenting it out. All right, and so we've done that. And the other thing that we want to do is we want to go further down the file, and we want to look for another directory called user_dir public_html. Let's see here if I can find it, and here it is, directory home *public_html. And what we want to do there is we want to remove the pound sign from the beginning of each line, starting here with this particular command. So let's remove the first one and remove each one down from that to uncomment all of these. Okay, so now that we have them all uncommented, what that means is now they'll be functional, and so now we're telling this particular configuration file we want to set up public _HTML directory under the home user directory. This star represents each user we set up in the system: Lincoln, Douglas, and Bell. So it's going to allow us to utilize the directory module for that, and so that's why we needed to do that here. Okay, now that I've modified the configuration file, I'll need to save it here and close that particular file. And let's save. All right. One of the things you need to know also about Apache is that once you modify the httpd.conf file, it will not be read again unless Apache is restarted. So right now, if we do a service httpd status command, it's going to tell us that Apache is currently running. We need to restart it so that it will reread the file we modified just now. So let's do a service httpd restart command to restart the server. And it stopped it and started it up again. So now it is restarted. So now we should be able to go out and hit from the IP address of this machine out on the network, unless there's some other things blocking that ability. We should be able to hit those websites that we have. What I didn't do, though, is one of the things I need to do before I do that is we have 3 default index.html files in the folder, which is, let me change directory to etc http. I'm sorry, not etc. It's var www.html. Let's go back there and let's look at the listing there. We've got those 3 user folder. We got index file there, and okay, I was going into the wrong area. That was the default index. I didn't want to go there. So let's change directory here to home. HTML, user, so let's go Lincoln, sorry, and then public _HTML, and then let's do a listing on this particular directory. There's the index file we need to change. So let's do a gedit index.html and get into that one. That's the default one we set up in the SKEL folder. So we need to modify it so we can identify this as Lincoln's web page. So this is the default web page. I've already got web page written out. Let me just go over here, jump out to it for Lincoln. So this is the default web page for Lincoln. Let me go ahead and save it and close it. All right, so now let's change directory to home Douglas public _HTML, and let's do a edit of the index.html file there. Okay, so this is the default web page. For Douglas, and I deleted some additional information I didn't want to delete, so I'll put it back and let me save that. Alright, and then the last file we want to grab is the one for Bell, so let's change directory to home Bell public _HTML. And let's do an edit on index.html. Bring that one up. Okay, let me click here and get rid of that information. And let's go out, and this is the default web page for Bell. Okay, so let's save that. Okay, now that we have all of that up, let's one of the things we're going to need to do is this: the Apache web server is running on this Linux system, so I'll need to get the IP address of the server itself. So to do that, I can issue in Linux an ifconfig command. In Windows, you may be familiar with the ipconfig. In Linux, it's if for interface. So it's the ifconfig command here. And let's see what the IP address is. We're at 192.168.142.160, so we need to remember that. 142.160. All right. And so let me go ahead and jump out to the Windows machine, and let me fire up the Mozilla Firefox web browser, and let's see if we can hit the websites that we just created with using the user space. Alright, so let me pull up another tab here and type in http://192.168.142.160, and that should hit the default page actually. So let me click on that and see if that hits the default page. That is the global page under var www.html. Okay, looks like something's blocking it. So what I'm going to do is go back onto the Linux system. One of the things that we need to check, there's several things we need to check, but one of the things that we definitely need to look at is CentOS Linux runs what's called SE Linux, which is the Security Enhanced Linux. And Security Enhanced Linux, in addition to the firewall, can block a lot of things going on at incoming traffic, and not give you permissions to certain things in the Linux system. First thing let's look at, though, is the tables of the firewall itself, which is the IP tables in Linux. So if I do an IP tables minus L here to get a listing, it is showing me that some things are rejected here, in particular the ICMP, but it's telling us that all the other traffic is accepted. So probably the firewall is not the issue here. I am going to go ahead and then flush the tables here just in case. So I'm going to do an IP tables minus F command to flush the tables, and then rerun the IP tables listing again to see what the changes that were made. And I flushed the rules, and so now everything is accept. So the IP tables or firewall for Linux is ruled out now as a possibility. But let's look at the Security Enhanced Linux. There's a command called get enforce in SE Linux that you can run, and it'll tell me whether SE Linux is being enforced, and it is returning that it is enforcing, which means that Security Enhanced Linux is running. It's enforcing permissions here on the system. That's probably what our problem is. In order to get rid of that, I can type in set enforce to 0 and hit return, and then let's go back and do the get enforce command, and now it has been reset to permissive, so it is going to permit us to get to it. Alright, so let me go ahead now and go back out to the Windows box, and I can hold the Shift key down and refresh this page. And we did get now a return page. This is the Apache default web page. So this is the default page at var www.html. Let's look and see if we've got the user spaces being able to access those websites that we set up now in Apache. And the way to do that is to issue an http://192.168.142.160, which is the IP address of the server, / and then a tilde Lincoln for the Lincoln's user space. And we don't have to put the index.html because by default we'll see that. And let's see if we get that return. It says it's not found, so we're going to have to look and see what's going on there. Okay, I did some checking and I discovered that on the httpd.conf file that I looked at earlier and modified, I failed to uncomment this particular command right there, which is user_dir public underscore HTML. That was still commented out, which means that the Apache, when it read that file, didn't see it, so it didn't know that the public underscore HTML folder existed as far as Apache goes. So I'm going to go ahead and save that now. And let me go ahead and close this file. And remember now, I've modified that file again, the configuration, so I'm going to have to restart the server. So let me do a service HTTP D status to see what the status is. Should be running. And let me do a service HTTPD restart to restart the server so it can reread the file. And now, since the server has been restarted, let me go back out here to the box, the Windows box, and let me try to access the user space folders in Apache again. So let's go http://192.168.142.160 / and let's look at the first user space, Lincoln, which is separated by a tilde. And it says it's forbidden. So there's still an issue. At least now it sees it, but it's telling us that we are not allowed to look at that file, which that's a permission issue, so I need to look at that. Okay, well, one of the things I discovered in my investigation for troubleshooting is I did a, let's go back and just do a listing we'll do an ALH. That stands for all long file format human readable. And let's look at the permissions on the directories, Bell and Douglas and Lincoln. Right now they're set up to read, write, execute for the user or the owner, and then to execute only for other, the group and other. So that means it's got a 711 permission. I'm going to bump that to 755 permission here, so that they have read and write permissions on group and other. I think that's what the issue is here. So let's do a change mod command 755, and let's do a recursive on Lincoln, Douglas, and Bell. And now let's do a listing again to see if those have changed, and they have. We now have read and execute here where we didn't have it before. So we now have 7.5 and we have 7.5.1. Let's change that to, I thought I had 7.5.5. No, it is 7.5.5. Okay, so 7.5.5, read and execute, read and execute. So that's 7 here, 5, and a 5. So we have 7.5.5 permissions on all those folders. Now let me go back out to the Windows box, and let me see if we can touch those websites again. So let's http://192.168.142.160, and let's do a tilde Lincoln. And this time we get, this is the default web page for Lincoln. Okay, that's very good. So we have the default web page for Lincoln using Lincoln's user space on the Apache server. And now let's do an http://192.168.142.160 / tilde and Douglas here instead of Lincoln. And we got Douglas's web page. And then let's check out Bell's just to make sure. 192.168.142.160 / tilde Bell. All right, and we do get Bell's web page. Very good. All right, so the last thing we want to look at for the end of this presentation is we want to look at the web logs. And the logs are found, there are two different types of logs. There's an access log and an error log for the Apache web server. And let me just issue a cat command, and they're located at var log httpd. And let's look at the access underscore log. Okay, and so this is the log here for access information, and you can see that it shows us that we are requesting various websites with the get command using Firefox web browser here. And so that pulls up a lot of information. It shows a website, or the IP address rather, of the machine that's actually doing that. It's 142.144. So I bet if I go back out to my Windows box and issue a IP config here, we're going to get that, yeah, 192.168.142.144. So that proves that, and the logs reflect that. And so let's look at the last log that we want to look at here, which is the error logs, to see if there are any errors that might have been logged on the Apache web server. And so that will be, let's look at cat var log httpd error underscore log. Okay, and so we do see that there were several errors. File does not exist error. We got that when we were trying to touch the website. There's the security enhanced Linux policy that was enabled, that we disabled here, and some other things. So this has been a demonstration showing you establishing Apache web server in CentOS 6.5 Linux and setting up individual user spaces with websites so that you can access those websites using the user space notification or configuration from the web browser out on the network.